Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, John Kelly, is making headlines for calling his former boss a fascist and suggesting that he praised Adolf Hitler. Let's watch.
But certainly the former president is in the far-right area. He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
Reacting on X, former Trump White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews tweeted, quote, "John Kelly, Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, was handpicked for the role. As a decorated retired general and Gold Star father, he is a good, honourable man. If he says Trump praised Hitler, met the definition of a fascist, and would govern like a dictator if allowed, we should believe him." MSNBC's Morning Joe also expressed outrage over the things outlined by Kelly. Let's take a look.
So this is more than an election to see who the next president is. This is an election to determine the future fate of what form of government we have and if Madisonian democracy survives.
Speaking of Morning Joe, the former acting director of U.S. National Intelligence, Richard Grenell, tweeted this morning, quote, "Comcast must step in and stop the dangerous rhetoric from Morning Joe." The New York Times, Mike, and every guest are saying that Donald Trump will use the military against his political opponents and saying he is absolutely Hitler. This is calling for someone to kill him. It's 2 weeks before an election, and the repeated emotional appeal that Trump must be stopped is calling for violence. So this is big news this morning. These comments by John Kelly, who was former White House chief of staff, saying that now the question many conservatives are going to be having is John Kelly has not liked Trump for a very, very, very long time. Mm-hmm. So why is he suddenly speaking up and recalling these instances of Donald Trump praising Hitler in a very specific context, by the way, saying that according to John Kelly, that Trump admired the loyalty of the generals that the generals of Hitler's had to him, which of course is actually not true. The Hitler's generals tried to kill him multiple times. You want some other? It's not a great metaphor for unquestionable loyalty.
No, it's not. But I mean, I think to answer the question about John Kelly, if John Kelly believes that Donald Trump is a fascist, then presumably he thinks he needs to do all he can to stop Donald Trump being elected for a second term as President of the United States. Now, you're right that Kelly has disliked Trump for a long time, but I got from your comment the implication that he's sort of motivated by personal animus, whereas in fact maybe he just dislikes Trump because he thinks he's a fascist, right? Because he thinks he doesn't have respect for the guardrails of civil society, because he will, in Kelly's judgment, be willing to use the military against his enemies and so on and so forth. So I think that's the reason that John Kelly is making this argument. And he did say, to be fair, that he actually agrees with some of Trump's policies, or some of Trump's policy positions at least. He just thinks he's literally too dangerous a person to have wielding the levers of power from the Oval Office.
Yeah, has that become a boy who cries wolf problem at some point? I agree that the things Trump said, including in the last week, are not good, are unwise, are actually spook people from voting for him who aren't already totally on board. But, you know, he was the president for 4 years, setting aside the very, very, very bad and foolish things he did with respect to the election. It was basically pretty standard Republican governance. And so what people on the conservative side wonder is is it really that, apart from some departures on foreign policy, which is that really the thing that bothers generals type mindset, military people like John Kelly, that Trump didn't always, although he ended up listening to them a lot of the time, probably more times than I was comfortable, is that really their criticism of him? Is it fascist not to listen to your generals?
But I don't know it's accurate really, Robby, with all due respect, to say that Trump's first term was broadly, with the exception of January 6th, orthodox Republican governance, because you can make that argument for sure on things like taxation, for example. But can you really make that argument about things like the way he would brand the media enemies of the people, the way he would speak profanely, apparently, about other countries outside the United States, the idea of, doing diplomacy with Little Rocket Man, who he was going to obliterate and then was his best friend and they'd fallen in love through their letters. Like, these are not... I
agree with you, but I still just put that in the bucket of that's the things he said. The things he says are well outside the normal boundaries of American politics. I 100% agree with you. That's what a lot of people like about him. That's what maybe even more people don't like about him. And I think it's a liability for sure. I criticize it all the time. But it's not. But I do even separate that from the actual governing policy. Maybe in some ways it's hard to do that on the foreign policy, right? If he's having a combative relationship with world leaders. But Joe Biden called Xi Jinping a dictator, had a faux pas about how he described foreign world leaders. Trump says some nasty things about some world leaders, but so do other Republicans who are more hawkish, and so do Democrats.
Yeah, I just think that whether one has some admiration for Trump's policies or not, it seems to me just impossible to argue against the fact that he has coarsened American political culture to a vast degree by the personal invective, by the hyperbole and frequently outright lies. And of course, we kind of skipped through January the 6th, but January the 6th to me seems the most damning indictment of him by a long, long way. And in relation to the debates that are around this election, we have discussed, and perhaps we'll discuss again today, things that Kamala Harris has missteps on or says things that are not particularly wise to say at various times. But that just seems to suggest or to imply, as political debates sometimes do, that there's a symmetry between Harris giving an awkward answer in an interview and Trump saying he would potentially sort of set the military on his enemies. Those two things are not the same thing.
I also, of course, don't agree with Rick Grinnell that Comcast should be deplatforming people who do heated criticism of Donald Trump. That seems like obviously a bad idea. In fact, I've criticized Democrats when they've called on the same media companies to deplatform Fox News or Newsmax or Donald Trump himself or whatever. So that seems like doing the exact same thing. No, you should be free to call Trump a fascist or the second coming of Hitler. If you think that's persuasive, go forth. That's your right. I don't think that's inviting violence against him, although it is true that Donald Trump has faced now repeated attempted assassinations, including one that actually did wound him and killed someone else.
Sure.
I'm not someone who lazily blames other people's political rhetoric for these kinds of things, although I will say that when the shoe was on the other foot, in many cases, Democrats absolutely did this, and then Republicans do it when it's on their side, and I think we obviously need space to criticize our political leaders, our candidates for the presidency, so I don't appreciate that kind of thing, but it happens on both sides a lot.
It does. I mean, I think I believe more than you that there is a linkage between rhetoric and violence, but I don't think it is a very simple or straightforward cause and effect. And I think the rhetoric and, for that matter, the violence both emerge out of an exceptionally polarized politics that we have right now, where there isn't really a middle ground often. And frankly, there are supporters of both sides who sort of speak in dehumanizing terms about their opponents, or they assume that having a different political belief renders the other person a bad person. And I think once you do that and you go down that road, then you open the door to all sorts of unpleasant things.
Well, coming up next on Rising, we're going to be taking a look at the Arab American vote, which unsurprisingly Kamala Harris is having some trouble nailing down. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with how Biden has handled the issues of Israel. Stay tuned, more Rising right after this.